The first thing Priya Sandhu ever said to me was that I had the wrong face. She didn't mean it cruelly. She looked up from the little cafe table by the window, glanced at the photo, still glowing on her phone, then back at me and said it plainly, like a person reading a shipping label that didn't match the box. "You're not the man in this picture." And she was right. I wasn't. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the shop. My name is Eli Marchand. I'm 31, and I run a little instrument repair place called the Spruce Bench, down on the Dartmouth side of the harbor, tucked between a barber who's been cutting hair since before I was born, and a laundromat that fogs up its own windows every morning. It's not much to look at. The floor slopes toward the back. The radiator clangs like somebody's trapped inside it. There's a hand-painted sign out front that bleeds a little in the rain, and a bell on the door that rattles instead of rings. But if you come in early, before the ferry traffic picks up, the whole place smells like cedar shavings, lemon oil, hot coffee, and the warm dust that floats up off old spruce when you sand it. That smell is, hands down, the best thing I own. I learned the trade from a man named Mr. Pelletier, who had the shop for 40 years and hands like tree roots. When his eyes went, I bought the place off him with money I didn't really have, and I've been clinging to it ever since. Open at 7. Restring, reset necks, fix cracked tops, glue down loose braces, sharpen the odd skate blade in winter because folks around here will pay cash for it and I can't afford to be proud. Close, sweep, count the till, go upstairs to the apartment over the shop, sleep before my body files its complaint. Some people would call that a small life. My ex-girlfriend did, in those exact words the night she left. She said I was a good guy with no ceiling. She wanted a man with a 5-year plan and a place that didn't smell like wood glue. I didn't fight her on it. After she left, I more or less decided that the love part wasn't on the menu for guys like me, and I poured everything I had into keeping the lights on. My brother Julian is the one our family actually brags about. He's 33, a corporate lawyer downtown in Halifax, wears suits that cost more than my mixer, drives a clean car, and can talk to anyone in a room without his ears going red. When my mom tells the relatives about her sons, Julian gets a paragraph, and I get a sentence, and honestly I stopped minding that a long time ago. Mom loves me. She just never understood why a person would leave a perfectly good office job to fix broken things in a damp shop by the water. That Friday, when she called while I was clamping a cracked dreadnought top, I already knew it was going to cost me something. Her voice did that sweet thing it does. "Ellie, sweetheart, can you do me a favor?" "I'm working, Mom." "It's about your brother." Julian, it turned out, had a blind date that night. Mom and her old friend Surinder had cooked the whole thing up months ago. Surinder's niece, a real catch apparently, and would Julian please look nice? And now Julian was flat on his back, with a fever that had come up out of nowhere, and there was no way to reach the niece in time, and if nobody showed up, Mom said, the girl would think the whole family was raised by wolves. "So you want me to go," I said, "to my brother's blind date?" "Just to explain. Tell her Julian's sick, say we're sorry, and come home 10 minutes. You're the kind one. People can feel that." I looked down at myself. Sawdust on my forearms, a smear of varnish on my cuff, hair that probably smelled like a lumberyard. A 31-year-old guy who fixes guitars, showing up in place of a 33-year-old lawyer in a tailored suit. "This is a bad idea," I told her. "Bad ideas are the only kind your father and I ever had," she said, and look how that turned out. Which wasn't an argument, but it was my mother, so it worked. I closed up early. Upstairs, I dug out the least creased shirt I owned, a plain white button-down that still had a faint stain near the wrist from some job I couldn't remember, and on the way I stopped at the flower stand outside the ferry terminal and bought a small bunch of snapdragons. Pink and white, a little crooked, nothing fancy. Just enough to say I'd tried. The place was a glass-fronted cafe on the Halifax waterfront, the kind with Edison bulbs and pastries lined up like museum pieces, a long way nicer than anywhere I'd take a person on purpose. The ferry was slow in the fog, so I came in 15 minutes late, hair damp, snapdragons going soft, and I saw her right away, corner table, harbor out the window behind her, a navy coat over the back of her chair, and an untouched flat white going cold in front of her. She had her phone up, and on it was a photo of my brother in a suit, looking like the answer to a question I'd never be asked. I felt like a parcel delivered to the wrong address. But I'd come this far, so I walked over. "You're not the man in this picture," she said. "No," I said. "I'm his brother. Julian's sick. Actually sick. Not standing you up sick, so my mom sent me to apologize before you decided our whole family was garbage." The words came out in a rush the way they do when I'm nervous. "I'm Eli. I'm not trying to be him. I just didn't want you sitting here thinking you got ditched. So, sorry. That's the whole speech. She didn't say anything. I started to stand. Then her eyes dropped to my hand and she said, "Did you bring me flowers?" I'd forgotten I was holding them. Yeah, figured if I was going to be late and the wrong guy, I could at least be the wrong guy with flowers. Something in her face loosened, just slightly, like the first quarter turn on a tight string. She reached out and took the snapdragons. "A stand-in for a blind date," she said. "Sit down, Eli. The least you can do is explain the stain on your sleeve." I sat back down. I meant to stay 10 minutes. I stayed almost an hour. I told her about the spruce bench, about the radiator that bangs, about the time I glued a customer's beloved old Gibson back together at 2 in the morning because he was burying his father that week and wanted to play at the funeral. I told her about Mrs. O'Coin, 81, who brings in the same ukulele every couple of months claiming it sounds off, even though it sounds exactly the same as it did the last time, and who I always tune anyway and never charge. Priya laughed at that. Not a polite laugh, a real one that surprised her because she covered her mouth right after like she'd let something slip. Then she told me her side. Priya Sandhu, 34, CEO of a battery storage company, that I gathered was kind of a big deal. The sort of place that had investors and a board and meetings long enough for the coffee to go cold 3 separate times. She talked about it the way you talk about a job you're good at and tired by, all at once. And then she said one sentence, quiet, looking at the window instead of at me. "My dad passed 2 winters ago. Heart. Since then, I haven't really known how to be a regular person." She said it and moved right past it, the way people do with the things that actually weigh the most. I didn't have anything wise, so I didn't reach for wise. I just nudged the little plate of pastries toward her. "Here." People are usually about 10% less wrecked once there's something warm in front of them. It's not science, it's just been my experience. 10%, she said. On a good day, 8 on a Monday. She laughed again, and this time, she didn't cover her mouth. When we finally stepped outside, it was still misting, the harbor lights smeared across the water, the ferry horn low somewhere out in the dark. I didn't know how to end it. She held the snapdragons against her coat. "This was not the date I was set up for," she said. "Yeah, sorry about that." "No," she said. "I meant it was better." And then, before I could ruin it, she walked off toward a cab, and I stood there on the wet sidewalk with absolutely no idea where to put the warm, foolish thing that had started up in my chest. That night I walked back over on the ferry and let myself into the dark shop. It smelled like cedar and cold coffee. I set my keys on the bench beside a half-finished neck, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, the place didn't feel small. It felt like the start of something I wasn't going to be smart enough to walk away from. I figured I'd never see her again. People like Priya Sandhu don't wander into lives like mine and stay past the novelty. So when the bell rattled on a Tuesday morning a week and a half later and she walked in carrying a guitar case, I nearly dropped a tray of bridge pins. She set the case on the counter and opened it like it was something fragile and holy. Inside was an old acoustic, a Larive from the 70s by the look of it. The finish checked and dull, one of the tuning pegs snapped clean off. "This was my dad's," she said. "He played it badly and loved it completely. It's been in a closet since the funeral. I figured if anyone in this city could bring it back, it'd be the guy who shows up to the wrong dates with flowers. I picked it up the way you pick up something that matters to someone." Ran a thumb along the cracked top. "I can do this," I said. "It'll take time. You don't rush an instrument that's been quiet this long." "I'm a CEO," she said. "I take everything that takes time personally." But she let me keep it. That was how the Tuesdays started. She'd come back to check on the guitar, then to check on the guitar, while clearly not checking on the guitar, then with her laptop, parking herself at the little table by the window where I keep my work notebook, taking calls with one earbud in, while I sanded and clamped and pretended I wasn't paying attention to her. She'd order a black coffee from the pot in the corner and ask me how the repair was going, even when she could see it, sitting on the bench, half stripped. I learned things about her in pieces. She can't stand sweet coffee. She'd rather have a butter tart than anything with chocolate in it, which is a deeply Canadian set of priorities and made me like her more. She has a dry, quick sense of humor, and she'll say something sharp, and then watch your face to see if you caught it. She rubs her left thumb along her wrist when she's stressed, around and around, probably without knowing she does it, and she hates being called tough. She told me once that tough is just a polite way people tell you they're never going to ask how you're holding up, because they've decided you don't need it. And she learned things about me I hadn't planned to hand over. She noticed I always fixed Mrs. Aucoin's ukulele for free. She caught me knocking $10 off a kid's repair because he'd counted out his money in nickels and come up short. She figured out that I can't take a compliment to save my life. That if someone says the work is beautiful, I'll suddenly find a bench that desperately needs wiping. One slow morning, she stood watching me file a nut slot and said, "Teach me something." Teach you what? Whatever you're doing with that little metal stick that makes you look like a surgeon. I handed her a sanding block and a scrap neck I keep for exactly this, and I showed her how to work the grain. She was terrible at it. Too gentle at first, like she was afraid of bruising the wood, then too hard, biting into it. Then she knocked a tin of fret wire off the bench and sent the little pieces scattering across the slanted floor. We both looked at the mess. "Are you going to fire me?" she said. "You're unpaid," I said. "My leverage is limited." We crouched down to pick them up, and somewhere under the bench, both our hands went for the same scrap of wire, and they met on the cold floorboards. Neither of us moved. It wasn't a movie moment. There wasn't music. It was just two hands, mine with sawdust ground into the knuckles, hers with a fresh dusting of spruce, touching by accident in a damp shop by the harbor. And the whole place went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. I pulled my hand back first, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted not to, way too much. That night, I closed up, and she didn't go home. We got chips and a couple of donaires from the place around the corner and ate them on the bench out front, watching the harbor go from gray to black, and when it started to rain we went back inside and sat in the little break room behind the workshop on the busted-up couch I bought off a customer years ago. The rain ticked against the window. Inside it was warm and yellow and smelled like cedar and vinegar from the chips. It was quiet a long time. Then she said, "Bad day. A deal I built for 8 months collapsed this afternoon because one person in a boardroom decided I'd been too attached to the outcome. Devin told me to take a weekend off, but if I take a weekend, everything just waits there in a pile for me to come back and fix." I didn't tell her to stay strong. I didn't say it'd all work out. I've had people do that to me, and it's like being handed an umbrella after you're already soaked. So I just said, "You're allowed to have a rotten day, Priya. You don't have to find the lesson in it tonight. You can just call it rotten and let it be rotten." She went so still I thought I'd said the wrong thing. Then very softly, "It's been a long time since anyone let me off the hook like that." I reached over and put my hand over hers on the cushion. Not a move, not a promise, just a hand. She looked at it, and then she turned hers over and laced her fingers through mine. The woman who ran a company I couldn't pronounce the technology of looked, right then, like someone who'd been sprinting for years and had only just been told she was allowed to sit down. That was the night I knew we weren't a repairman and a customer anymore, and it was the same night I started to understand exactly why that was going to get complicated. It couldn't stay a secret long. Mrs. Aucoin started asking who the woman in the nice coat was. The kid I gave the discount to elbowed me about my girlfriend. Even the guy who drops off the mail started leaving little knowing smiles. I smiled along, but the worry had already taken root, and it wasn't about being ashamed of her. It was the fear that one day she'd look at the spruce bench the way an outsider would and finally see how small it really was. That fear got teeth the afternoon my brother walked in. Julian showed up in a charcoal suit, shaking the rain off a black umbrella, and stood in the middle of my shop looking around like an inspector pricing a teardown. "Still exactly the same," he said. "What do you want, Julian?" "Coffee." I poured him one. He didn't drink it. He looked toward the back, then back at me and said, "Mom mentioned Priya Sandhu spends a lot of time here." "She's a customer." "Just a customer." I didn't answer that, and he gave me a thin little smile. "You know she was set up for me. I was sick. You went in my place, and now you're holding on to the opportunity for yourself." That word, opportunity. It turned something cold in my stomach. She's not an opportunity. He leaned on my workbench like he owned it. "Ely, the woman has capital, a board, connections to half the money in this province. Do you have any idea what a relationship with someone like that could do for a person?" "Are you describing a woman," I said, "or a line of credit?" His jaw tightened. "I'm describing reality. She doesn't belong in a damp shop full of sawdust, and somewhere in there you already know it. When the novelty of all this wears off, the simple guy, the honest little life, what's left? You really think she's going to pick a leaky workshop over the life she built?" He set his coffee down untouched. Don't let your feelings make you forget where you stand. After he left, I stood at the bench a long time, the neck I'd been working on gone cold under my hands, the rain graying out the whole shop. Because the worst part wasn't what he'd said, it was that I'd thought every single word of it myself in the dark, more than once. So I did the coward's thing. I didn't tell Priya. I just started leaving a little more room between us. Nothing she could point at. Just busier. Just shorter. Just somehow always mid-task. When she came into the back, I'd say it wasn't a great day. When she suggested dinner, I had paperwork. She noticed, of course she did. One afternoon, she stood at the counter with her black coffee and said, "Are you avoiding me?" "No," I said, wiping a bench that was already clean. "You used to look at me," she said. "You don't anymore." And I had absolutely nothing to put against that. It wasn't only me. Her friend Devon, her COO, her closest person, came by once. Polite, sharp-eyed, took one slow look at the mismatched stools and the slanted floor and me, and then said something to Priya later that Priya repeated to me without meaning to wound. "You built a company people write about, and you spend your Tuesdays in a guitar shop in Dartmouth?" Priya said she'd been angry about it. But I could see the other question sitting behind her eyes, the one she hadn't decided yet. Am I hiding here? Do I want him? Or do I just want the quiet he gives me? And if I step all the way into his world, do I crush the very thing that makes it feel like a place to breathe? We started moving around each other carefully, and that carefulness hurt worse than a fight could have. The real blow-up came on a gray afternoon when the wind had jammed the bell so it didn't rattle. Priya came in early and I didn't hear her. Julian was there again, leaning on my bench, and he was mid-sentence. "She's the opportunity this family's been waiting a generation for. Don't torch it because you've convinced yourself she actually cares about you." "Opportunity," Priya said from the doorway. Julian's face drained. "Priya, I didn't know you were. You think I'm a deal?" Her voice was so level it was worse than shouting. "You think I'm a ladder for this family to climb? You think Eli took something that was reserved for you? I'm sorry if you misunderstood." "I understood perfectly," she said, and then she turned, and although she was looking at my brother, every word landed on me. "I don't come here out of pity for Eli. I'm not slumming it to rebel against my own life. I come because this is the only room I've found where nobody's waiting for me to be the most impressive version of myself. If you can't understand that, you never actually wanted to know me." Julian opened his mouth and shut it again. Once in my life, I didn't step in to spare him the embarrassment he'd earned. He left. Then she turned to me, and the anger in her eyes thinned into something a lot harder to look at. "Do you think it too?" she asked. And I knew she wasn't asking about Julian. She was asking whether I believed she'd eventually leave. Whether I thought she was just resting in my life on her way back to her real one. I wanted to say no, but fear made me hesitate. 1 second. 1 stupid second. She saw it. She set her coffee on the counter, very gently, like she didn't want to break anything else. "I see," she said, and she walked out into the rain. I didn't go after her, not because I didn't want to, because I was afraid that if I caught up to her, I'd have to admit the thing that scared me most wasn't her leaving. It was the chance that she might actually stay, and that one day she'd look up from this slanted floor and realize I'd never been enough. 3 days. The table by the window sat empty. I didn't brew the second pot. Her dad's guitar sat half-finished on the bench, the new peg waiting to go on, and I couldn't make myself touch it, because finishing it felt like an ending. I told myself this was the smart outcome. She needed her world. I needed my shop. Better to break it off early than to drag it out and break it worse later. Saying all that didn't make the place feel any less hollow. Bruce's bench was still full of cedar and coffee and the work of my hands, and without her in the corner, it had gone back to being a small, damp, slanted room that was too quiet for its own good. Saturday evening, I was about to lock up when the bell finally cooperated and rattled. Priya stood in the doorway. No coat that cost a month of my rent, no laptop bag, no boardroom face. A gray hoodie, hair pulled back loose, and a Tim Hortons tray with 2 coffees in it, plus a paper bag. "We're closed," I said. "I know." She held up the bag. "I bought butter tarts. Too many. There's enough here for the whole ferry line." She tried to smile and didn't quite get there. "I came to learn how to finish my dad's guitar. With you, if you'll let me." I should have told her it wasn't a good night. I should have kept the distance I'd built so carefully. But I'd missed her so badly that just seeing her standing under my crooked sign with a box of butter tarts undid every smart thing I'd planned to say. I unlocked the back door. "Come on, then." We finished the Lariva together. I showed her how to seat the new tuning peg, how to bring the dull old finish back up with oil and patience, how to file the nut and set the string so the whole thing would sing instead of buzz. She was still clumsy. She over-tightened a string until it pinged loose and whipped across the bench, and she got oil on her hoodie, and at one point she sanded so enthusiastically that a fine cloud of spruce dust settled in both our hair. She looked at me, powdered gray, mortified. "You've just assaulted me with a coniferous tree," I said. The corner of her mouth went up, and the air in the room let go a little. While the oil set, we cleaned the floor on our knees, and our hands met again on the boards, and this time neither of us pulled away. She looked down at our fingers. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the condo, the company, this place, about you. Don't interrupt me, or I'll lose my nerve." I nodded. She took a breath. "The condo's beautiful. Glass on two sides, the whole harbor laid out under me. And every time I walk in, all I hear is my own footsteps in a space that's too big to be a home. It's a very expensive hotel that I happen to own." She looked around the shop. "Here it's the opposite. It's loud and damp and the radiator screams. You argue with a 40-year-old radiator. Sawdust gets in everything, and I don't have to perform for a single second of it." My hands tightened around the rag. "Priya, what are you saying?" She looked at me a long moment. "I want to leave the condo. I want to be here." "No," I said before I'd even decided to. She went still. I stood up. "No, Priya, don't. This isn't a movie. I'm up at 6. The shop's cold half the year. The floor leans. The rent goes up every spring and the checks come in slow. Some months I genuinely don't know if I can pay myself. There is nothing here that looks like your life." "You keep talking like I haven't seen it," she said, standing too. "You've shown me your mornings and your bad days and the radiator and the slow checks. I'm not a tourist, Eli." "Oot, then give it a season. And when it stops being charming, when you start missing the glass and the people who write articles about how brilliant you are—" "You're speaking for me," she said, and her voice dropped. "I'm being honest." "No," she said. "You're scared." The word hit dead center and I couldn't answer it. She stepped closer. "You're scared that one day I'll wake up, look around this shop, look at you covered in dust, and decide I chose wrong." I looked away. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low and not entirely mine. "I'm scared of more than that. I'm scared of believing you. I'm scared of letting you hang your coat next to my apron, of letting you watch the days I fail at this, and then one day you'll figure out my brother was right, that I was just a warm room you stopped in between the real parts of your life." I made myself keep going. Someone told me once that my life was too small. It took me years to stop letting that sentence run my head. And then you walked in by accident and laughed at my jokes and made me start thinking maybe a small life is actually enough for somebody. I don't think I'd survive being told I was wrong about that. Priya stepped right up close and took both my hands. "Ely," I didn't pull away. She said it slow and clear. "You are not the smaller choice. You are the real one." I looked at her. I've had the money. I've had the title and the view and the rooms full of people clapping, and I still felt scraped out. The one thing I never had was a single place where I didn't have to earn my own welcome. Her voice shook. "I'm scared too. I'm scared of leaving what I built. I'm scared of what people will say. I'm scared I don't know how to love a person without turning it into a project with milestones. But the thing I'm most afraid of right now is you deciding for me that I should go." The shop was dead quiet except for the rain and the radiator and, somewhere on the bench, the new strings on her flute's guitar settling into tune all on their own. I'd run out of reasons. I had a woman in front of me who'd argued with my brother, spilled fret wire across my floor, eaten chips on my couch, and come back through the rain with a box of butter tarts and her dad's guitar, and I was trying to push her out the door to protect a version of the future that hadn't even happened. So I stopped. I pulled her into my arms. She went stiff for half a second, and then she held on like she'd been waiting for permission to. "If you really want to stay," I said into her hair, "I won't decide for you that you should go." She closed her eyes against my shoulder. "Then I'm staying." I lifted her chin. Her eyes were wet, but they didn't look away from mine, and I kissed her. It was not a smooth kiss. Her hair was full of spruce dust. My hands were rough as sandpaper. The radiator picked that exact moment to bang twice, and the floor under us still wasn't level. But she put her arms around my neck and kissed me back, and I knew I was done standing outside her life with my hands in my pockets. She didn't quit the company the next morning. She's not reckless, and I didn't want her torching a decade of work to prove a point to me. She did it the way she did everything, in stages. She moved into an advisory seat, handed real authority to Devon, leased the condo out instead of selling it in a panic. Then, slowly, things started showing up in the apartment over the shop. A few books. A ridiculous espresso machine that cost more than my truck. A mug that says CEO off duty that she drinks her black coffee out of every morning. She went through the shop's books with me, and here's the thing that still gets me. She never once tried to take over. She didn't try to turn the spruce bench into a chain. She'd sit beside me after close, point out where I was getting gouged on supplies, suggest a winter skate sharpening promo because she'd noticed it was my steadiest cash, and find ways to get the shop's name out without sanding off the one thing that made it feel like home. For the first time, I understood that change didn't have to mean betraying who I was. Sometimes it just means opening another window in a room you already love. A year on, the shop wasn't drowning the way it used to. The sign out front is still hand-painted and still bleeds a little in the rain, just brighter now. There are photos online that actually look good, most of them taken by Priya on mornings when the light comes off the harbor and hits the workbench just right. We get steady work from a couple of music schools, a little online store for picks and strings, and a band saw that no longer sounds like it's dying. But it's still the spruce bench. The stools still don't match. Mrs. O'Coin still brings in her ukulele claiming it sounds off, and I still tune it for nothing. The bell still rattles, and the whole place still smells like cedar and lemon oil and coffee at 7 in the morning. 2 aprons hang on the hook by the bench now. Mine's old, stiff with 40 kinds of varnish. Hers started out clean and pale and is now mapped with oil and stain and one permanent scorch from the time she leaned on the heat gun. There are mornings she comes down the stairs in an enormous sweater, hair a mess, and says, "Coffee before words, Marchand," and I hand her the cup before she can finish the sentence. My mom came around slow. At first, she was sure Priya was just romanticizing a hard life she could leave any time. Then she watched Priya stand at the bench at 6 in the morning, oil to the elbows, dead serious about getting a fret level right, and one afternoon out back, Mom said to me, "I always thought Julian was the one who'd end up with a woman like that." I didn't say anything. She watched Priya through the doorway, frowning over the work like she was signing a contract worth millions. "But I get it now," Mom said. "She doesn't need someone like her. She needs someone who lets her be herself." Julian came around too, eventually. He apologized, admitted he'd looked at Priya and seen a transaction. I didn't hug him, but I poured him a coffee. "She didn't pick me because I beat you, Julian," I told him. "She picked me because she wanted to be here." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I can see it now." The night I asked her, there were no fireworks. I waited until we'd closed, until the till was counted and the rain was tapping the window the way it had the very first time. She was hanging up her apron and I said, "Hang on a second." She turned. "Are you hiding another invoice from me?" she said. "Worse," I told her. I took a small box out of the drawer where I keep my notebook. It wasn't a ring box. It was one of the little craft boxes I use for picks and strings, tied with a faded, snapdragon pink ribbon. Her smile went uncertain. "Ely." My hands weren't steady. "I thought about doing this somewhere nice," I said. "A restaurant, a view, some perfect night." I opened the box. Inside, on a square of parchment, was a plain silver ring, a guitar pick I'd cut from rosewood with both our initials burned into it, and 3 dried snapdragons from the first crooked bunch I'd ever handed her. "But the only place that made any sense," I said, "was right here, where you spilled my fret wire, where you told me you wanted to stay. Where I kissed you with sawdust in your hair and finally believed a small life could be enough for somebody." I got down on one knee on that leaning floor. She put both hands over her mouth. "Priya Santu," I said, and my voice cracked clean in half. "I can't give you a glass condo. I can't give you a life that's always clean and easy. But I can give you every morning in this place, every guitar that comes back to life on this bench, every argument we figure out together, and every single day I choose you with everything in me that's real. Will you marry me?" She didn't stay standing the way people do in movies. She got down on her knees in front of me on the floor, took my face in both hands and said, "You still think you only have a small life?" I couldn't get a word out. She kissed me, and it didn't taste like our first kiss. It tasted like tears and coffee in the year we'd built. When we pulled back, she held out her hand. "Yes," she said. Obviously yes." I put the ring on her finger right there, surrounded by cedar dust and the smell of bread from the bakery 2 doors down opening up for the morning. Outside, the harbor lights ran soft across the wet window. "You remember that blind date?" she said, looking at the ring and then at me. "Yeah," I said. "I showed up for somebody else." She shook her head. "No, you showed up exactly where you were supposed to be. We just hadn't caught up to it yet." And I pulled her in close on the floor of my shop, and for the life of me I couldn't find the small life anybody had warned me about. There was just the rain and the cedar and 2 aprons on the hook and the warm certainty that the wrong date had been the most right thing that ever happened to me. It still gets me. How close I came to talking myself out of the best thing that ever walked through that rattling door. I keep coming back to the math of it. If I'd refused my mom that Friday, if I'd told her a guitar repair mattered more than my brother's blind date, Priya Sandhu and I would have lived our whole lives on opposite sides of the same harbor and never once known it. Every good thing I have now traces straight back to one small, inconvenient choice to show up when it would have been so much easier not to. That's the part people tend to miss about doing right by others. It almost never feels heroic in the moment. It feels like a hassle you take on anyway, because it's decent, and then years later you look up and realize that one quiet decision built your entire life. But showing up was only the beginning. What nearly wrecked us wasn't Julian, and it wasn't Devon's raised eyebrow, and it wasn't the gap between a glass condo and a leaning shop floor. It was me. I let my brother's word, opportunity, burrow into my head, and I started deciding Priya's heart for her, dressing up my own fear and calling it realism. The smartest thing I ever managed was finally telling the two apart. Being honest with yourself about what's genuine fear and what's genuine good sense is harder than any fret job I've ever done, and it took me 3 empty days and a box of butter tarts to figure it out. Real judgment isn't knowing all the answers. Most of the time it's just being clear-eyed enough to quit lying to yourself. And none of it would have held together without the stubborn part. Priya didn't torch her company overnight to prove a point, and I didn't suddenly stop being broke. We built it the slow way. An advisory seat here, a skate sharpening promo there, a radiator we argued with instead of replacing. The shop never got easier, we just got steadier at carrying it. Every time something cracked, we'd ask each other whether we were fighting the problem or fighting each other, and that one question, asked 100 times over, is the closest thing to a secret I've got. Love isn't the grand speech on the kitchen floor. It's the grit to keep showing up after the speech, on the cold mornings, when nothing about it feels like a movie. So, if you take anything from me and Priya and a floor full of spilled fret wire, let it be this. Be the one who shows up, even when you're the wrong man with crooked flowers. Be honest enough to tell your fear apart from your common sense. And once you find the thing, or the person, worth keeping, be too stubborn to let a little hardship talk you out of it. The smallest life, chosen on purpose and held with both hands, turns out to be more than enough.